if this is your first time that you've been on one of these sessions, heard from ClientSuccess, first time, learning about who we are and what we do, I'll give you a quick intro. We are a customer success growth platform. And so we really help with all things related to customer success. So whether that's helping you drive onboarding, drive adoption, drive renewals, drive growth, anything that your CSMs need to provide a better customer experience, that's the type of thing that we help with. And so we've been rated on G2, as you see here on the slide, as a leader, one of the top players in the category. And also, if you haven't seen recently, just a couple of weeks ago, we won the 2020 Cody Award for the best customer success solution on the market. And so we were thrilled about this, really excited about it, and just wanted to kind of let all of you know that if you haven't seen ClientSuccess, or it's been a while since you've seen us and seen what we're about, love for you to reach out. We're easy to find. You can find us at clientsuccess.com. You can hit us on Twitter at ClientSuccess. You can shoot me a note directly. I'm just easy to find. I'm mark@clientsuccess.com. And anybody who's interested would love to share a little bit more with you. That being said, let's switch gears back to the topic for today. And Mike, I think you can still hear and see us. So I'm going to stop sharing on my side because I know you have slides that you're going to share. And let me see here. It looks like I don't think you had I think your video wasn't on. I think your video's on now, or at least you can turn your video on. There he is.
Turned it on.
Looking good, looking good. And so, yeah, I'll let you run with it. And like we always do for kind of everybody else on the session, this is going to be interactive. Mike has, I forget, probably about a half a dozen slides to share on the topic of customer advisory boards. I'll play color commentary. If you have questions that you want to ask, feel free. I'll man the chat pane, I'll man the Q&A, and we'll try to make this as interactive as possible. And we'll let Mike run with it.
Excellent. Well, Mark, thank you so much. And I'm delighted to be with all of you today. So I am a professional facilitator of customer advisory boards, but that's not really the stance that I want to take to present with you today. So I've been, as a facilitator, working with B2B companies to architect and drive advisory boards for just about 20 years. And what I've really become is a student of human psychology and how people respond. And by people, I mean executives with key decision makers and your customers, how that dynamic changes from the good times to the challenging times. So over the past 20 years, just to give you perspective, I ran my first customer advisory board in April of 2002. So 9/11 had happened. We're in the throes of the recession. Really tough time to start a business, much less try to get customers together to have this conversation. Then in 2008, when we had the financial crisis, there were a lot of companies laying off marketing and sales and laying off customer support people and hoping for the better day to emerge. But not all companies did, and I'm going to talk through that a little bit. And now today, of course, we can say that the crisis we have today is indeed, in fact, unique and unparalleled in human history. Yet from a human psychology perspective, on the types of conversations executives are having with key decision makers or not having, they're parallels. And so what I wanted to share is a little bit of perspective of what I see from my somewhat unique vantage point. And as Mark said, we do want this to be kind of interactive. So I've got a few slides I'm going to put out there, but I really want to allow you to ask questions and maybe share some thoughts on issues that you're maybe thinking about as it relates to an advisory board or not, because there are some opportunities here. So this is geared to what I think CS executives need to know and why your company needs one now. Now, here's the, let me see if I can move to my next screen here. All right, my computer does not, there we go.
There we go.
All right, so we've got an opportunity, and let me just be completely candid. Unless you're Netflix, Amazon, Facebook, you're not going to make your quarterly or your yearly numbers. And I hate to be the one to break you news to you, but you're not. And so the question companies have is, well, do we push forward to try to make our sales numbers and with some aggressive marketing and sales? And I don't know about you, but I've seen some rather aggressive, tone deaf, should I say, marketing and sales ploys to try to sell to me. Or do we have an opportunity to do something different? And there's an opportunity to pivot where customer success becomes more important than sales. In fact, here's this notion, I've been talking about this for the last 3 months or so. What if your current customers today are your only customers in 2020? What if you're just not going to get any more? Because it's hard to sell. And in fact, a lot of companies have other priorities than maybe, buying your product. So if there's an opportunity to pivot to help your current customers, what does that look like? And how does that play into where an advisory board can give you a competitive advantage? And that's some things that I wanted to chat with you about. So first, and I don't know how many of you on the call have experience with advisory boards. Maybe your company is running one, maybe you haven't done one before. So let me just kind of level set with a precise definition. A customer advisory board is a commitment to and cadence of forward-focused strategy roadmap discussions. These are invitation only. It's maybe a dozen of your best customers that come together to meet with your executives periodically, at least in the old days. And as of January 2020, you might meet once a year in person, have this conversation. But now that's completely changing. In fact, anything you thought you knew about advisory boards prior to January 2020, all that has now changed. And I'm going to share with you a little bit why and how it feeds into human psychology. But the CAB program, the advisory board program today must integrate virtual and in-person contact to pursue those kind of conversations. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But I also want to be clear on what these words mean, because a customer advisory board, each of those words are very important. One question I often ask groups for the first time is, do you invite prospects to attend your customer advisory board? The answer is absolutely not. It's a customer advisory board because these people are customers. They've got history with you, a set of expectations. They've got a common frame of reference to which guide you. And here's the word advisory board. This is where you set up conversations where they can actually provide you with advice and directional information to help you make decisions on which way that you want to move forward. This is important because many companies in the past who wanted to put one of these things together struggle with the agenda, and the knee-jerk reaction is, well, let's give them a parade of our product updates. And that's not what you do. It's about advisory board. You follow the 80-20 rule. 80% of your agenda is customers responding to your questions and telling you things about their business that you don't know. And then the third, board, we're talking 12 customers. It's like a board of directors, although it's not. It's like a board of directors in that you want this group of very senior strategic people to give you directional guidance, just like you would a board of directors, but there's no fiduciary responsibilities. You don't pay them. They come to interact because they want to help you, help them, help their business. So there's a little bit more to it, but I want to clarify this. This is not a focus group. It's not a customer appreciation event. It's very clearly meant to be an advisory, strategic kind of interaction. Now, it used to look like the picture on the left, and maybe this goes without saying, but let me just be clear. And this is an example of what an advisory board room might look like. Of course, now it looks like the right, where it's now been replaced with virtual kind of gatherings, but it's not a one-to-one correspondence. People, when you talk about the psychology of how people want to engage, they want to have conversations that are timely, that are relevant, that are meaningful for them, that help them solve specific problems or issues as they think about their own future, because advisory boards are future focused. In the past, you would settle to say, you know what, we're going to run a full day advisory board meeting in September, and we're going to have a full agenda. You can't do that virtually. So what you're talking about is programmatizing a bunch of virtual components to take the place of what would have been a one-day face-to-face meeting. And I'll give you clues into that in just a second. So as we think about how do you nurture the type of conversations that will help you as your business, how do you do that? And there are three rules or steps or points of guidance that I want to leave you with, and then we're going to open this up to discussion. So the first is, now is the time. I'll talk about that in a minute. The second is, think programmatically. And the third is, let's make it easy. Use the tools you already have. So let's just be blatantly obvious. Our world is changing dramatically, and the output of the changes are not yet known. In fact, I think it's going to continue to evolve, certainly for the rest of the year, and maybe out of the next couple of years as well. When we think about how people are changing, how they approach going to the office, how they approach dealing with other companies or businesses. Are they able to stay in business? How are they managing payroll? All that kind of insourcing and outsourcing. And when times are good, it's easy to invest in an advisory board project and said, yeah, we'll take time out, we'll have a strategic conversation. But I'm here to tell you that when times are most difficult, like now, the benefits from your advisory board are so incredibly important, much more than when times are good. So let me give you a specific case point. I mentioned in my opening that I started right after 9/11. We did a lot in 2008. And what I can tell you with complete honesty and passion for this, is that those companies, many companies in 2008, in the global recession, decided to hunker down, and they stopped investing in marketing and sales. They pulled back a lot. If they had an advisory board, they put it on hold for a while, and they waited for a better day. But not all companies did that. There were a few companies that said, you know what, at minimum, we're going to keep a little lifeline onto the customers, and we want to know how their world is changing and what can we do to help. And there were no definitive answers in those conversations, but boy, did these customers love having an opportunity to be asked the question. And so what happened when we turned the corner, and maybe late 2009, 2010, where bright spots started to emerge, those companies that kept the lifeline with this conversation did noticeably better in building and growing revenue with their existing customers, and then leapfrogging the customers, their competitors, because they kept that strategic dialogue going. They were able to strengthen the bond with the relationship with their customers. Because if you think about it, how do people make decisions? And given all the analysis and evaluations that companies will do, execs will do when choosing product A or product B, always at the end of the day, the decision is based on emotion. And the decision to purchase or not, to partner or not, to move forward or not, is largely based on faith and the chemistry, personal interaction a decision maker has with the people selling to them. And through the advisory board, you were able to keep that relationship going, albeit in a different kind of renewed kind of way, and maybe a minimal kind of way. But when you compared that to those companies who completely shut it down, they were miles ahead when things started to get better. I'm seeing the exact same thing happen now. There are, to overgeneralize, there are two types of companies out there. One type that says, I'm uncertain what the future looks like. I don't know what the answers are. I don't think the customers could tell me anything I don't already know. Therefore, I'm not going to talk to them. I'm going to circle my own wagons first. Versus other companies that says, you know what, I don't know what the answer is, but I'm going to invite my customers so we can talk about it. There are two types, and I can already see opportunities with those companies that are starting to keep those conversations going. So now is the time, even though you're wondering, gee, I have no idea what tomorrow is going to look like. That's point number one. Point number two is your customer advisory board is not just a single meeting. In fact, even in the good old days of pre-January 2020, a lot of companies that I work with treat the advisory board as a sprint. There's no attention throughout most of the year, and then 3 months before the event, there's this mad frenzy to get it done, put your agenda and move forward with the conversation. That's not a good way to do it in the best of time. It needs to be this ongoing, interactive, kind of programmatic approach. And it's more than a single meeting. Now, with that in mind, here are the two questions that I always advise my executives to think about. What is it that you want to learn? And God forbid you learn it. How are you prepared? What are you prepared to do with it? How are you going to share that with your company? How are you going to act on what you've heard? Now, let me be clear here that when you run an advisory board, you're under no obligation to do anything a customer says, you know, gee, I want your homepage in blue. You're under no obligation to make it blue. You are under obligation to understand why they want it in blue and consider it, and then you get back to them later to tell them what you decided to do. The worst thing you can do is host a meeting because it's on your checklist of things to do, and then the meeting's over and you go, oh, that was really interesting, but I don't think we're going to do anything different. Well, then you've wasted a huge opportunity, and next year your customers aren't going to want to come back. But if you think in terms of a cadence of customer touch points, especially now during this crazy time that we're all in, and you focus on, you know what, if you could magically wave a wand and have a handful of customers with your executives to have an open, candid conversation about the future, what would you want to learn? And how would that help you make better business decisions? There's always an answer. Although these questions are hard to figure out. What do you want to learn? What are you prepared to act on? That takes some careful thought. So that's point number two.
What is the format you would use for this cadence? So like in the last slide or a couple slides ago, you talked about, okay, instead of getting everybody together to go into a conference room, now we're moving to a Zoom meeting. Now, is the cadence a series of these kind of now Zoom sessions, or is it, you know, surveys? Is it, you know, some type of, let's call it like a LinkedIn or a private Slack group? Like, what do you typically see as kind of best practice for
Mark, that is
keeping the cadence going?
Right, that's a great question. That leads into my next slide here. It's like, well, what
Awesome.
are the virtual advisory board program elements? And because you are talking about streaming together kind of a flow chart or cadence of what these are. So let me talk briefly about this. First of all, let me put your possible anxiety to rest. Do you need a virtual event platform to run a virtual CAB program? My answer is no, because you're talking about a dozen customers to interact with you, and you want that to feel more intimate and exclusive. It's not like you're hosting a conference for 5,000 people and you need to have kind of a robust virtual program element. You don't. So on this slide, I'm a practical and pragmatic guy. I'm also, to be honest, maybe a little bit lazy. It's like, how can I use the tools I already have? So these are the usual suspects, and you're going to see this is not rocket science. However, the strategy on how you link these definitely is. So you've got the member interviews. So a good place to start, especially, and what's happening now with a lot of companies that I'm working with, is gee, we were going to do an advisory board later in the year. I have no idea what to do. You know what? Let's interview CAB members and let's find out what's important to them. What do they want to know? Now, this is a virtual piece of the puzzle that happens virtually anyway. But then we're also talking about podcasts. We're talking about a webinar, which is great for one-to-many, kind of like what we're doing now, where people have a chance to offer some Q&A, but that's not good for interaction. Virtual roundtables, and if you do use Zoom, Zoom has got a feature where you can assign people breakout rooms within an existing Zoom occurrence, and you can get some of that that flavor. These virtual roundtables, by the way, I'm advocating that they're no longer than 1 hour. People are Zoom overloaded now. Perhaps you on the call are feeling that. I've asked executives, how many hours during the day are you on Zoom? 7, 8? Oh my God. People are, right, and then you lose the effectiveness because people are kind of zoning out. So virtual
Somebody asked me the other
roundtables.
day how my life has changed since we went into quarantine. And I said, well, really has changed in that I used to spend 4 hours a day on Zoom and now it's 7 or 8. Like that's my life.
You know what? You're not alone. And then of course, though, there's video conferences. All of these pieces need to be moderated. And then in tangent or maybe in parallel with this, you're setting up a curated text or chat. Now, a lot of people are using Slack for that. Now, the difference is in the old world of cabs, they would say, oh, we'll get a mailing list of all the customers and we'll email them so they can have contact. It's like, great, that worked then. That's not good enough now. What I mean by curated is, imagine if you had once a month a key question that you wanted to put out to your advisory board members. Somebody within your company who would, probably your cab manager, who, by the way, I think could be a customer success director or VP, would put out this question and say, hey guys, I know we're talking about X, Y, and Z. What do you guys think? You got an opinion on this? So somebody at the company needs to curate that to spark the conversation to get used. And what you learn there feeds into what the topic covered in a webinar, a virtual roundtable, or video conference would be. And I can illustrate more a specific example for you if you like in a minute. Surveys and polling, which is a common tool of Zoom and WebEx, et cetera. Also within Zoom, as an example, you can do a virtual whiteboarding or you can do virtual mind mapping exercises, both of which are awesome for being able to take a small group of people and instead of just having them look at the screen and maybe getting bored, to actually engage them, to share control of the screen, to interact with them. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you. None of this is nearly as effective and as productive as an in-person meeting would be. But this is a whole lot better than doing nothing, and you can actually get a really good lot of value at this. So Mark, in answer to your question and how I've helped companies design this is we say, okay, these are the program elements. Now, if we go back strategically to what is it you want to learn and what are you prepared to do with the information that you collect, now let's set up a way to engage over a 6-month period in small little bite sizes. 1 hour, we've got a 1 hour Zoom call. I'm working with a company now, and this morning we had a prep meeting for the first webinar that's happening next week. And the webinar is an update on the company's strategy and to give a response to what we've learned from the member interviews that happened before. So then the CEO, the cab sponsor are sharing in a webinar kind of what they're learning on this. And then teeing up based off of this, we've got 3 different topics that we want to have a virtual roundtable deep dive in. We're going to run one of these roundtables every 2 weeks for the next 6 weeks. And we're going to dive into one topic one at a time. And then later in September, there's going to be a video conference, as it will, where the host company can then reflect on everything they learned over the last 6 months and give an update on the strategy and some next steps on what they've decided to do. So here, I very quickly laid out for you a series of breadcrumbs that allows you to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening. And again, you come back to human psychology about what is the real benefit for doing this now. It's showing your customers that you care enough to ask the question about, hey, how has COVID-19 affected your business? What can we do to help you? How is this impacting your ability to plan for the future? What does that mean for you? What would you like to learn from us or your peers? Let's have a couple of virtual roundtables on it. And that camaraderie, that bonding you have while times are tough are going to give you insights into the mind, the psychology, and the priorities that your customers have that you would not have had before. So I can pause here if there are any other questions, Mark, that are showing up in the chat window on this.
Yeah, there's actually several questions. And a lot of them kind of like jump around kind of the concept of kind of who to be involved. So earlier on, you mentioned, I think something around, get the executives, get the strategic leaders of your customers involved. And so, one of the first questions that Anna asks is, how do you best get executive engagement? She says, like, look, we've struggled with getting our key contacts, and we can't even get our key contacts to show up to something like this. So how do we actually get their bosses
Okay.
in a
Good
lot of
question.
cases? Like, how do you manage that?
That's a really good question. And so because you've asked, I'm going to dive into a little bit more of tactics. I have discovered that there is an incredibly highly effective way to get executives to attend your advisory board. And these are executives you may not know yet. And there are a ton of ineffective ways that don't work at all. So let's focus on the ways that do work. Your advisory board represents an exclusive, intimate executive to executive conversation. That means the language you use to describe what you're doing in these conversations needs to come from your CEO, from the top executive that you want to get. Now, there may be conditions that may be different from your company. So let me speak generically here. If you want to get a top executive to come to your meeting, you need to have the invitation come from your top executive, because this is the connection you want to have. If you're trying to sell upwards, you're like, oh, I'm the cab manager and nobody knows who I am and I'm trying to get these executives, it's not going to work. Now, the reasons why, there are 3 reasons why executives want to come to your advisory board, and it does not matter what industry you're in. Now, largely this is kind of human psychology. The first reason is that they want to network with their peers to talk about strategic issues they care about. So if your CEO, and by the way, you're not selling anything. The advisory board is not a sales meeting. You'll get insights that will help you sell, but it's not a sales meeting. So if your CEO says, hey, you know what, in light of the changing world, we're struggling with X, Y, and Z. We see a lot of our other customers kind of struggling with these big strategic issues. We're forming an exclusive executive level advisory board to come talk about this. We'd like to save you a seat at the table. Would you like to join us? So they want to network with their peers, talk about strategic issues that they care about. That's always the number 1 issue. The number 2 reasons why they come is that they're genuinely interested in seeing your roadmap, and they want to influence it to their best advantage. And we should just be above board and say, you know what, that's totally cool, and we're going to allow that. And so you will share directionally where you're going. This is not a parade of product updates where you have all the product managers showing baby pictures of the products. No, there are other forums that are better for that. And the third reason, and if you miss this one, the advisory board totally falls apart. It's because you are sincerely, genuinely interested in hearing what your customers have to say. Now, I mention this because there are some CEOs I know who are friends of mine even, who are very smart, brilliant people who actually believe that the customers cannot tell them anything that they don't already know. I would never put a customer advisory board in front of them, because their body language and their behavior, they're just not listening. They're not built to listen. The advisory board is going to fall apart. So to this question, what you want to do is have the right language and the right invitation coming from the CEO that explains the business value and the strategic nature of this conversation that your customers will get. Obviously, there's value for you as the host company, for sure, but you don't lead with that. You lead with the value to the company that you want to invite. Mark, am I hitting the point? I'm sure there's probably follow-up notes that you're saying.
Yeah, you definitely hit that. And kind of there's another, so like that's the who of how do I get the executives involved? And that makes perfect sense. Anna, I hope that answers your question. If there's any follow-up questions to that, feel free to shoot them in there. There's kind of also like the other side of this, which is, and maybe this isn't a true customer advisory board, like what you're saying. It's like, what if I also want to have some type of an organization to get feedback from, non-executives, from frontline users, from mid-level folks? If I've got a product that is, in one case, if I sell an executive level platform that is only sold to executives, totally makes sense that I would have executives, but maybe I have a product that gets sold up and down the organization. Executives might never even see it because it's all used by frontline.
So there's actually,
would that be a different type of organization, a different, like, would you even call that a cab? Like, help us understand that a little bit.
So there's actually, embedded in your question are two different assumptions and two different things that are going on. So one is, I'm selling a product, the CEO or the top executives that you want to, because typically these are C-level people. It's a CIO, it's a VP of whatever would come to these things. And maybe they're not as familiar with your product. That doesn't actually matter. Now, we do want them to have some understanding of your value proposition and what you do. So first, I'm going to address this. I'm selling widget A, and the users know who we are. How would we get the customers involved? That's the first part. The second is, well, what if I just want to do a focus group? What if I want to get users, which I'll attack in a minute. So when you're, and this, I'm going to give you a gross generalization. All I deal with is B2B companies, and all of them have this deep-rooted concern that they're selling too low in the organization. They're selling to first-line managers. It's easy. They got the relationships, but they have no idea where the company's strategy is going. And so they fear that they can't have the conversation. I'm here to tell you, no, you want that conversation. You want to know how your customer's business is going to change 3 to 5 years from now to make sure that your products are still going to be relevant for where their business is going. And you're not going to get that from first-line users or even first-line directors. You need to get the C-suite people. It's a valuable conversation and market research information you're not going to get anyplace else. Now, to the other extreme of this, I'm a big fan of building a voice of the customer program. Voice of the customer program goes beyond just an advisory board. And if I don't have a slide in this deck, but I have a pyramid model that has 3 levels, 3 tiers of types of customer engagement. At the bottom level is what I call kind of tactical. You have many people in your company having many conversations on every given day on the tactical operations of your product. This is typically where customer support plays. I had a bad experience on Tuesday. What are you doing to fix this? So there's surveys kind of fit in there. They're managing chat rooms. That's all at that bottom level. And you need that. The middle level is what I call product direction. Now, product direction is where you want to get fine-tuning insights and details on your short-term product roadmap. What that means is from a time span of 6 months out to 18 months out, your product is kind of baked, but you want to tune it for maybe a industry segment, and you want more tactical operational use case kind of feedback. What you want to pursue is a more traditional product focus group kind of engagement. Now, a lot of things I'm sharing with you this morning about the psychology, about why advisory boards work at the highest level, work exceptionally well for this product level as well. So if you're saying, gee, Mike, I don't really need that executive. What I want is a product focus group to have kind of more operational conversation. Follow the same format. You won't be disappointed. You're going to learn a lot of stuff. You gear the questions differently to your audience, but it works just as well. At the top of the pyramid is where the customer advisory board fits. Now, I should mention on the y-axis, you have tactical questions at the bottom and strategic questions at the top. Tactical question is, I had a bad experience on Tuesday. What are you doing to fix it? At the top is, hey, Mr. Customer, how has COVID-19 affected your business, and how is your business pivoting to look different in the future because of this? That's a strategic question. So you want to map the right tool to the right job to ask the right question to get input that's appropriate and helpful to you, and you invite different people along the way. I fear I might be overcomplicating this, but
no, I think that's great.
Fit in a broader construct of voice of the customer. That's my answer.
Perfect. So I know you've got a couple more slides. We got a few more questions. Let's go through, your final 1 or 2 slides, and then we'll jump in and kind of wrap up with questions.
So why I think this is an opportunity for customer success leaders. Every company needs to have a customer advocate leader. And obviously, I think customer success, not customer support, is the best leadership position to own this. Now, we've talked about strategy level conversations, and this third bullet, I mean, I'd be interested to get some feedback on this, but I'm a big advocate that says, look, you're not going to make your quarterly numbers or your yearly numbers this year. Just don't lose sleep over it. Pivot. So the question would be, how can you help your customers maximize the current investment they have with you? How can you make sure that you understand where they're going and you're being helpful to them to do what they need to do? And so I've got this notion of creating CS pods. And I think for the rest of the year, I'm going to make a bold statement. I think everybody in marketing and sales and customer service should be in customer service. You should be focusing on, how do I add value to my customers? Don't sell them anything. If they want to buy something, you'll gladly sell it to them. But what if you were to pivot to say, to create ambassadors within your company that are customer advocates to say, you know what, hey guys, how is COVID-19 affecting your business? What does this really mean operationally? Maybe you don't know, we've got a whole bunch of videos and training and onboarding stuff. Let us tailor that so you can be more effective with what you're doing. You're offering something. By the way, a lot of companies are offering a whole bunch of free stuff for customers to help encourage that tighter bonding of this. So I see the CS leadership, if your company does not have an advisory board program, sometimes the CMO runs it, sometimes it's a VP of strategy or VP of products. But if you don't have one, a CS leader is a perfect person to kind of, be the ringleader for this. And even if your CMO is working on this, you should be partnered with them closely. So that's essentially where I'm going to leave it. Mark, I've got a whole bunch of information. I invite all of you to check out my cabstrategy.com website. I created over the last 18 years a central repository of best practices, of articles. I've written books, and I've got videos on all kinds of questions you're asking today and a whole lot more. It's just a lot of information out there, and I welcome people to check it out. Mark, let's get back to your questions.
Cool. Yeah, let's jump in a few more questions. So, and if you haven't asked your question yet, this is now a perfect time to pop it in there, and we'll get through them. One of the next questions that came through a little bit earlier was from Andrew, and his question is a little bit more tactical. He says, look, should you openly share the makeup of who your cab is, like the actual people, or is that something really only understood by attendees when they see who's there?
Boy,
do you want to say, I've got, John from XYZ company or Jane from, ABC company? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question, Andrew. So you never, ever share who sits on your advisory board. This is an exclusive, intimate group. The makeup of your advisory board members is going to change over time based on their availability and based on your interests. So it's not static in nature, and it's dynamic. Also, once you start promoting this, what are you really doing? You're saying, hey guys, I'm special. We're running an advisory board. Look, you're using it for your publicity needs, and that it's going to backfire against you. Now, more practically, early in my career as a marketing strategist, so first and foremost, I was a marketing strategist, and I would do a lot of guerrilla marketing tactics. And so when I wanted to win customers away from my competitor, I would go to the website and I would say, gee, I wonder who they're doing business with. I see that they've posted their customer advisory board members. I know their name. I know their title. I know what issues they're working on. Your competitor has given me a ton of information. So I created my own list and I went after them. Hey, it's on the internet. It's fair game. You don't want to do that. So don't give your competitors an advantage by letting them see who's on your advisory board. It should be, you're running it under the cover. It's a strategic asset. Treat it with respect. So that's my answer, Andrew, to your question.
Cool. Very good. Now, thinking about which of your customers, so should I be inviting only happy customers, customers that have some strategic value? Should I be inviting, customers that, maybe a stretch, maybe a market that I'm trying to get into? Like when I think about which of my customers, which executives to invite, how do you
Yeah,
think about that? What's your advice?
it's a great question. Um, so again, you're going to come back to what do you want to learn and what are you prepared to do with the information that you collect? Do you invite only happy customers? No, and I hope you don't. Look, I know there's a lot of ego in play, and it's hard to listen to messages that you don't want to hear. However, having an advisory board made up of customers who are they're strategic, and you can define strategic in a couple of ways. They're either spending the most money with you, they're not spending the most money with you, but they're growing faster than other customers, or maybe they're doing something really innovative and interesting. Maybe you get a mix of those people together. If you invite only happy customers, they're going to taint the information they're going to share back with you. You're not going to get the full picture. Now, at the same time, do you want to invite customers who are really angry and upset with you? I mean, maybe not. There's a balance. Ultimately, you're going to strategically put together a board. You're going to cherry pick who you want to invite. They need to meet a specific profile of requirements that you would put out. And ultimately, you're going to need to feel, would these be a good, productive board member? Are they going to gel with the other customers? Is there going to be mutual respect? And so that's a bit of a harder question, but don't default to say, gee, I can only ask customers who are happy. Oftentimes, the most powerful things you can learn are why customers are unhappy with you, not why they're happy. This,
Yeah,
by the way, leads in, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, sometimes the most strategic customers, in a lot of cases, can be your most difficult or most seemingly unhappy. I remember a few weeks ago we had Greg Danes on a previous session, and he was sharing an example that in a past life he was doing a lot of business with Apple, and he was just having just a heck of a time trying to satisfy his counterparts at Apple, and they just kept coming down on one thing after another. And they were seemingly a very dissatisfied customer. And finally, at one point, Greg kind of gets fed up with it, and he turns to his counterpart and is like, well, if you're just so dissatisfied, why don't you just cancel? Why don't you just kill the relationship? And the guy at Apple turns to him and says, look, well, why would I cancel when you're making me so much money? Like, Apple seemed like a very dissatisfied customer, but Greg was making them a ton of money. So sometimes the more strategic customers, they're just, in a lot of cases, the ones that are going to push you the hardest to innovate,
Right.
etc. So,
you know what? I couldn't agree more with you, Mark. The challenge is not, gee, you're happy today, great, and I want to hear things that are going to make me feel warm and fuzzy. No, you want to stretch yourself to, is your value proposition going to be relevant 3 years from now? If not, it's good to find out now. And as I mentioned before, sometimes you hear things that are going to make you uncomfortable. Your job in hosting an advisory board is to listen and to be open to the possibilities. Now, this, by the way, is why you must have your advisory board facilitated. If you don't, or if you try to facilitate it yourself, you're at risk for your meeting turning into a customer complaint session. And that's not valuable to anybody, certainly not valuable to you. But so first is you want to be very selective in who you invite. We're talking only about 12 seats around the table. So you need to be strategic in who you pick and how they're going to fit together. You also want to be strategic in what you're going to talk about and how you're going to use that information. And you want to be strategic on how those conversations unfold, which is why you need to have somebody skilled to making sure that, your meeting runs productively and you don't go off the deep rails with, hearing things that are just unhelpful to you. Next question.
So let's go a little bit deeper on that. So Ken asked the question and you bring it up, so it's a natural segue of yes, we need to discuss problems. We don't want to come into these saying it's all sunshine and rainbows, but how do you actually avoid that how do you keep the cab from just becoming a discussion of, product problems, product issues?
No, that's great. So again, as I mentioned before, it comes down to the language that you use when you're setting the expectation in your invitation email and every type of interaction. The advisory board is a future-focused exploration, if you will. It's about looking 18 months to 3 years out. So you're not talking about current product problems. And in fact, if a current product problem gets in the way, your facilitator should say, hey, thanks for mentioning that. I'm capturing it on a parking lot. We'll follow up with you individually afterwards. You want to stay focused on the future, on where you're going. There are better forums for dealing with product specific feature sets. That's where product focus group can fit, or other surveys. Can use the right tool for the right job. Many companies get into trouble because they think of the advisory board as a catch-all for any question anybody in the company wants to ask, and it's not. So you, again, voice of the customer, structure out what kind of conversation you want to have with what type of people.
Great. So Roxanne goes a different direction. Her question is more related to, we're a global company. So, in our case, what's your advice on if we've got a globally distributed customer base, workforce, et cetera? Would you advise, them to have cabs by geo, or is there multiple different cabs? Like, how do you think about that? What's your experience working with, large global companies?
So Roxanne, awesome question. Just as with politics, all politics are local when it comes down to it. All advisory boards must be local. So you as a company will have a singular global customer advisory board program. You will execute a customer advisory board flow or engagement for EMEA. You will do a separate one for North America. If you've got something in the Asia Pacific, so you will, by default, you should think in terms of geo theaters. And it's possible that 80% of the agenda might be the same geo to geo, but you're not going to mix geo audiences together. That's not good, because Europe has different regulations and different priorities and different blah, blah, blah than North America. And Asia Pacific, China and Japan are two other, they're completely different. You have to do something completely different, tailored for them because of culture, because of language and translation, all that kind of stuff. But let's just take EMEA versus North America. Would I ever mix them? Usually not. There is a case where I would, but I'm not going to complicate that. I would say, if you're getting an advisory board program off the ground, sponsor a geo program, but you're going to have a North America execution and you're going to have an EMEA execution. You plan them in parallel, but you're going to have a dozen customers in EMEA, you're going to have a dozen customers in North America, and you're going to talk amongst them as their group, and then later you can kind of compare notes and put them back and forth. This even applies if the customers, because I can hear Roxanne, the wheels in mine are turning, she's going, but these customers are global customers. So then, if they have North America operations and EMEA operations, well, then you kind of make a judgment call on which theater you think best plays for how you want to engage them.
Awesome. Very good. So maybe kind of final question, and if there's any more other ones, feel free to pop them in. But kind of the final question I see is like, so, it's, June 2020. I really love everything that you're saying here, Mike. What would be kind of the first thing you would recommend I do? So say we don't have an advisory board and I'm thinking about proposing it to my team. What would be the first one or two steps you recommend I take? Maybe let's go have a conversation with my executives. Maybe it's go get, where do I start? What's the very first one or two, three steps that I take?
You know what? I think that's a great question. And I actually have a couple of resources that, Mark, I'll share with you after, and you can share with them with the rest of the group. So there are a couple of questions. So if you're posing this for the first time, I think it's worth taking a couple of people in your company to have a conversation that says, you know what, guys, if we pursue an advisory board, what is it we want to learn, and how would we use the information that we collect? Now, in order to answer that, it would be helpful to know what questions you're asking what customers now. So there's, I have a table, which I'll send to Mark, and Mark, you can send out, and it's the difference between product focus groups versus customer advisory boards versus user groups and user conferences. And you can see how the difference of objective and questions asked and yada, yada is. that might be helpful. If you were to take a blank sheet of paper and say, you know what, today we're engaging these tactics with these customers to ask these type of questions. And if you were to whiteboard out that on a sheet, I think it will become clear where you have either overlaps or duplications of groups asking the same questions to the same customers. And there's going to be voids of, gosh, nobody's asking questions like, how is your business changing over the next 3 years? Or how are you dealing with trends and drivers? Are those questions being asked? So if in your own assessment of voice of the customer, who's asking what questions to what, you may be able to define a gap where a customer advisory board would be an obvious fit. So that would be kind of number one. Number two, and you could use kind of this pyramid slide that I illustrated, which I'll also send you, Mark, afterwards, and you can forward that up. Would be, so it's June 2nd now. I always think in terms of practicality. Don't eat the elephant all at one bite. Maybe what you want to do is think about in terms of a pilot. How could we pilot a very simple conversation? Maybe you take 5 or 6 of your best strategic customers. You've got a good, really relatively good relationship with them. What if we were going to get them together for an hour-long virtual roundtable just to respond to, how is COVID affecting your business? What does that mean to you really? How can we help? And maybe that's all you do to get the flavor of how a virtual conversation would go and unfold. And based on that as a prototype, coupled with your customer question assessment, you would have more data and more of a better feeling of, I think we could springboard off of this to do something more programmatically useful. So that allows, and you know what, is it hard to get people together for a virtual roundtable? I'm going to say no, it's not, especially not. If you position it right, you're asking for an hour of their time, right? There are ways that you could easily execute that. Does it cost any money? No, right? It's all your own elbow grease to kind of run this in a way that's practical and pragmatic. So that would give you an opportunity for a quick win where you could say, hey, engaged in customers, we had a different conversation. Gosh, this is really useful. Maybe we should use this in an advisory board. The third thing I will ask you is, if you're not sure, you should interview your customers and ask them, hey, we're not sure if we want to do an advisory board. Do you think we should? And have the customers tell you what you think. I'm willing to lay money on right now that your customers will say, you know what, I've been waiting for you to do one, and here's why I want it. So you let the customers give you the language you use to build the business case to convince your CEO or your CMO or whoever says, hey, I want to partner with you. I want our CS organization to partner with you to sponsor this advisory board. And it's not just me thinking it's a good idea. I talk to, Fred, Jenny, and Roger and our customers, and they're all wondering why we're not doing this already. That can be really powerful. So those are 3 ideas on what you can do now that would really help you.
Cool. No, that makes perfect sense. And we are right up against time. So, Mike, really appreciate you spending the time with us. I learned a ton from this. I think everybody else learned a ton from this, hopefully. Any last, things you want to share, a final call to action? Do you want folks to connect with you? What's your kind of final thing you want to share? And then we'll wrap up.
So I know that for any of you have questions, I'm going to offer you 2 things. One is, and you see on this slide here, please go to cabstrategy.com. You'll find out all kinds of really useful information. There's also my contact information that's up there. But if you want to come to me directly, let me give you, here's my email, here's my telephone. Feel free to send me an email. I know there were some questions we weren't able to get to. How do we deal with confidentiality? Do we have 2 competitors from the same industry? I've got answers for all of that. So you got questions, I'm happy as an attendee of today's webinars to answer those questions. Mike G at kickstartall.com. Kickstartall is my website. The CAB Resource Center is a separate site dedicated to CAB best practices. Bookmark it, have some fun, don't be shy with questions, and I'd love to answer them and share additional information should you have an interest. And I'll leave it at that.
No, this is fantastic. Really appreciate it. And again, I thank you on behalf of Client Success. Thank you on behalf of all the viewers. And yeah, hope you and your family are doing well. And we will see you next time. So thanks again.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. Thank you all for attending.